Good afternoon or good morning to some of you. Just want to congratulate you on completing week 3 of our Divided Nation modules. We're now going to the Civil War. You'll notice for this week you have 3 assignments, and I'm going to read the first assignment and walk you through it. Um, it is the Civil War, and it's broken into 2 different sections. We have the introduction, and then we have the North versus South. There are a total of 4 questions. You must complete the reading and taking a look at the images in order to answer the questions. I just want to say thank you and great job for those of you that have been completing their assignments and remembering to do a check on spelling, grammatical errors, and writing incomplete sentences. This all goes a long way and is very important and beneficial in your grade. So we're going to get started. The Civil War. You'll notice at the top there are 2 different images. I want you to take a look at them and tell me if you can't tell me, but I want you to distinguish between the 2. One represents the North and one represents the South. The North had, as we read in our previous module, had more benefits or more advantages, such as financial, such as manufacturing. All of the warehouses and industries were in the North, so they were able to create all these different items that would be necessary. For example, you notice that their uniforms are nice, and they have the fancy hats, they have the fancy horse, you see the building. So that is an image from the North. Then you have the other image. Some of the soldiers look a little dusty. Their uniforms aren't as fancy, as well as the people that are at the parades. As you scroll down, we have an image with 2 different men that appear to almost be the same people. However, they are not. They are brothers. And this is an example of the impact that the war caused, not only on the country or the states, but on families and communities. Because you have 2 brothers. One chose to fight for the Union, which is the North, and the other chose to fight for the Confederacy, which is the South. You also notice the one has more supplies and is, pretty much ready, whereas the other one doesn't have as much supplies. All right, so let's go into the text I'm going to read, and for some of you, if you'd like to follow along, great. If not, you can just fast forward. The Confederate attack of Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, ended months of confusion. The nation was at war, and the time had come to choose sides. Early in 1861, representatives from 6 of the 7 states that had succeeded or decided to leave the Union of the United States, they met to establish a new nation, which is called the Confederate States of America. You see, Southerners believed that just as states had once voluntarily joined the Union, that they could voluntarily leave it now. The men who fought for the South were proud defenders of Southern independence. So just an FYI, this is where we had the Confederate flag. Where it comes from is because they had formed their own country within our country. They had decided to separate. They were no longer in agreement with Abraham Lincoln and his decision to want to try to maintain the country as a whole. So they voted and had their own president and vice president, and also had their own flag. For many Northerners, the choice was just as obvious. There can be no neutrals in this war, only patriots or traitors, declared Senator Stephen Douglas after the attack of Fort Sumter. Most Northerners viewed the succession of Southern states as traitorous or treacherous, an act of rebellion against the United States. They marched off to war, eager to defend what they viewed as their Union, their Constitution, and their flag, our American flag. So now you have an image of soldiers marching off, and you have people out looking. Take a look at that. I'd also like to note, pay attention to the text. On to the next paragraph. Choosing sides was harder for the 8 slave states located between the Confederacy and the free states because they had ties to both sides. 4 of these states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, joined the Confederacy, which is the South. The western counties of Virginia, however, they remained loyal to the Union. They broke away to form a new state, which is now called West Virginia. Although the other 4 slave states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, they stayed in the Union, and many of their citizens, they didn't like that. They were sympathetic to the South. These states, along with West Virginia, they became known as the border states. Again, the border states are West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. These are the border states. Okay, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Americans began to see why a civil war, a conflict between 2 groups of citizens in one country, is the most painful kind of war. Why? Well, because it divided states, families, and friends. In this lesson, you will learn how this Brothers' War became the most destructive of all American wars. So now let's complete those 2 questions. How might Civil War soldiers for both sides have felt marching off to war? Describe for the Union soldiers and the Confederate soldiers. So I want you to go back and take a look at those images, as we discussed them and in the text. And judging from what you see, please describe it for both the Union and the Confederate. The Union is the North, the Confederate is the South. Question number 2. How do you think civilians watching the parade might have felt and why? So this is all the people that came out from the, and who would those people be? Those people might be, for the South, wives, sisters, daughters, younger sons, grandfathers, maybe men that were too old, and maybe some fathers. May have been some free slaves, or some slaves that were made to go with their masters. For the North, it could have been free slaves, women, children, or again, how would these people have felt watching this parade? Those people that were there. So this gives you have to understand, why did they want this war? Why were they doing this? Well, the South, they felt that they were protecting their rights, that they had the right to have slavery, and they were fearful that the North was going to end their livelihood. And the North, they thought that this was wrong for you to decide to leave the country and to just do what you want to do, that we are a whole, and that slavery was immoral and wrong. So please answer those two questions by entering in the text box or submitting. Now let's scroll down to North versus South. First picture is of Abraham Lincoln, who was our president, and then the following image is Jefferson Davis, who was the Confederate president. And now for the text. The North. The North began the war with impressive strengths. Its population was about 22 million, compared to the South's 9 million. Additionally, with about 90% of the nation's manufacturing and most of its banks, the North was both richer and more technologically advanced than the South. The North had geographic advantages too. It had more farms than the South to provide food for troops, and its land contained most of the country's iron, coal, copper, and gold. The North controlled the seas, and its 21,000 miles of railroad track allowed troops and supplies to be transported wherever they needed. The North's greatest weakness was its military leadership. At the start of the war, about 1/3 of the nation's military officers resigned, and they returned to their homes in the South. During much of the war, Lincoln searched for effective generals who could lead the Union to victory. However, the North's greatest advantage was its newly elected president, Abraham Lincoln. Through even the darkest days of the war, Lincoln never wavered in his belief that the Union was perpetual, never to be broken. Throughout his presidency, Lincoln related the preservation of the Union to the ideas of the American Revolution. In his first inaugural address, he said that the Union was begun by the American Revolution, matured and continued by the Declaration of Independence, and affirmed by the Constitution. So now let's talk about the South. In contrast to the North, the South's great strength was its military leadership. Most of America's best military officers were Southerners who chose to fight for the Confederacy, which was not an easy decision for many of them. Colonel Robert E. Lee, for example, was not a supporter of either slavery or secession, but he decided that he could not fight against his native Virginia. Lee resigned from the U.S. Army to become commander-in-chief of the Confederate forces. The South had geographic advantages as well. To win the war, the North would have to invade and conquer the South, meaning the North is coming to them. So the South, one of their advantages is that they knew the land. They were bringing the battle to them. But the sheer size of the South made this a daunting task. The South, in contrast, could win simply by defending its territory until Northerners became tired of fighting. The South did have an important geographic disadvantage. If the Union gained control of the Mississippi River, it would divide the Confederacy in two. The South's main weaknesses were its economy and its transportation systems. The region's agriculturally based economy could not support a long war, and the South had few factories to produce guns and other military supplies. The Confederacy also faced serious transportation problems because the South, they didn't have railroads, which were needed to haul or take the troops and the supplies over long distances. At the time of the succession crisis, Jefferson Davis was a U.S. Senator from Mississippi, a firm believer in states' rights. He resigned his seat in the Senate when Mississippi left the Union. Like Lincoln, Davis often spoke of the American Revolution. When Southerners formed their own government, Davis said in his inaugural address, they merely asserted a right which the Declaration of Independence of 1776 had defined to be inalienable. Remember that word? He believed the South was fighting for the same freedom cherished by the nation's founders. So now that we have read that, in that text, it talked about the advantages and strengths of the North and the advantages and weaknesses of the South, as well as their beliefs. What was their motivation? The South believing that it is their right, their inalienable rights, which were confirmed or defined in the Declaration of Independence. However, Lincoln felt as though it was our responsibility to always stay together and to never break up, no matter what, which was because of the Declaration of Independence. So it's interesting how they both use the same event and documents. So now we have questions 3 and 4. Question number 3 asks you, what were 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses of the North? Please complete that. You may find that from the text. Question number 4, what were 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses of the South? Now, once you have completed this information, please make sure that you check for any errors, that it's in complete sentences. You have until, this is due on April 22nd, which is a Wednesday, this Wednesday. Good luck, and I, of course, miss you all. I pray that you all are safe and that you are in good spirits. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions or need any assistance. If you have the phone number of any of your classmates, please reach out to them as well and remind them it's very important that you guys complete your assignments. A suggestion was that you do first period Mondays and Mondays. You do what did I say? You do first and second period on Mondays. You do third, fourth on Tuesdays, 5th and 6th on Wednesdays, 7th period on Thursdays, and any corrections or makeup work that you have on Fridays. I have no problem with you completing it according to that timeline, as I have stretched the dates out when assignments are due. So again, please feel free to reach out to me. Have a great day, guys.